Supply chain managers usually don't develop their own supply chains. They usually come into a desk, be it a senior buying position or a buyer manager or a transportation manager. They come into that desk with pre-existing measures and metrics. It's inherent, or it's part of the duty of that manager to evaluate those measures and metrics of his predecessors and even his own after a certain amount of time to make sure that they are effective and to make sure that they are driving appropriate behavior. As we are evaluating them, we can use the performance categories listed here on this slide. The first one being time. Time captures an effectiveness dimension. This slide gives examples of each of the main performance categories. Time is associated with effectiveness. The most commonly used metric listed here is the on-time delivery metric. Another metric here is order cycle time. If you Google order cycle time, you will see that the first four definitions are different. From my experience, order cycle time indicates the time span between the placement of an order and when the material or service is delivered to the customer. If we move over to the quality category, I'm surprised that I don't see defects per million, which is a standard for supplier evaluations. I was also surprised and happy to see forecast accuracy. We know forecasts are always going to be wrong, but if we track this metric, we can statistically understand how big the standard error will be. If we know that, it can help us determine what kind of safety stock we need to have on hand in order to make up for the errors in the forecast. As you look on to the cost category, notice the first item is finished goods inventory. Inventory usually requires a capital investment, and then even more money is required to maintain that inventory on the shelves. The cash-to-cash cycle time is trying to capture how long it will take between the initial investment for supplies until we receive the cash from our customers. For instance, some businesses like Dell used to have a negative cash-to-cash cycle time. In other words, they received payment from their customers before they even began buying the parts from their suppliers. They could do this because they had special contracts with their suppliers, in which the suppliers promised to manage the inventory at the Dell warehouses, and it would remain the supplier's inventory until Dell took them off the shelves. We'll get into the supporting metrics on the next slide. As I mentioned before, if you Google order cycle time, you'll see many different definitions. That is problematic. One of the characteristics of a good metric is understandability, not only in your own company, but across companies. If we don't have the same definition for a metric, it becomes impossible to benchmark your supply chain performance against other companies, even other companies within your same industry. How well are you doing? How well could you be doing? If you don't have benchmarks, you can only compare your performance to your history. The SCORE model tries to address this problem. Not only do they use specific metrics to evaluate areas of performance, they strive to define how those metrics are gathered and calculated. The more buy-in to the SCORE's model, the easier it is for supply chain professionals to communicate their performance to their supply chain teams, their customers, and their potential customers. It even becomes easier to communicate their needs to their suppliers.